So, since Blizzard stopped publishing sub-numbers and started using sharding techniques in-game that limit the number of players in any one space, it has become very difficult to tell how many people are actually playing and enjoying WoW. So I thought I'd run a poll to find out exactly what is going on with Warcraft, and the results were really interesting and quite surprising. 15% of respondents selected the option "I enjoyed Shadowlands and I have enjoyed most recent expansions." This basically just confirms what most of us know, that BFA was a bust and that prior to Shadowlands the WoW player base was becoming increasingly uneasy. This would be worrying for most companies, but you have to bear in mind that Warcraft's audience is both intensely loyal but also intensely critical. Now, the next finding is something the developers would be delighted to hear, and that's the 35% of the audience selecting the option "I have enjoyed Shadowlands compared to other expansions." I did not expect that number to be so high, even though that's basically my perspective. Now, the most surprising conclusion here is that only 6% of the audience selected the option "I find Shadowlands disappointing compared to other expansions." The typical characterization of the Warcraft player base is of intense toxicity, so I was really expecting more here. What should give Blizzard serious cause for concern is the 29% that selected "I feel like WoW has been on the slide for a while now," suggesting Blizzard have a lot of work to do with winning back disaffected players. The findings of this poll are basically quite positive, but it has to be viewed in the context that many players have left Shadowlands since launch, and those players are less likely to engage with this poll, creating some sample bias. Against this, I'm guessing my audience in particular is more skeptical and critical of Blizzard than most others. Now, I made the poll and now this video primarily to find out what players actually think and to encourage comment and more votes in the original poll. So please leave a comment below and vote if you haven't already. Now, to start with, as with most expansions, the art department continues to astonish everybody with the quality of their work. I spent a significant amount of time just hanging around in Ardenweald near the start of the expansion doing very little, because it's just so damn pretty. This has become something of a cliche in the WoW community as the artwork team consistently excels. Now, at maximum level, the game is unusually broken, with some spectacular exploitable glitches regularly appearing. Things have quietened down a little, but at the start of the expansion, I literally didn't have time to cover all of them. Now, I'm sure Blizzard will blame this sort of thing on the remote working they have to do with the global situation currently, but I don't believe that, since, in my experience, people are the least productive when they are in an office. And the vast numbers of businesses who have expressed an intention to carry on working from home indefinitely around the world is testament to that. I suspect what it is actually down to is Blizzard not paying their staff properly. It is obvious if you look at Bug Report that most complaints are simply ignored, and when fixes do occur, they make things worse. And that surely has something to do with the lack of incentive and morale of Blizzard employees. To be fair, most of this stuff doesn't really impact the player experience that much. Indeed, it can be very entertaining for everybody. Now, additionally, there is a lot of broken content at lower levels of the game, much of which has basically been abandoned for maintenance purposes. Essentially what happened is that when Blizzard scaled everything to the player's level, they used a mathematical algorithmic solution, which is fine for 80% of cases, but doesn't work on unique NPC abilities that had more thought and complexity to their original design. Now, this isn't something the player base is aware of or gets discussed much on forums, because older players spend all their time at max level. But I do wonder what new players think when they get hit with one of literally hundreds of NPC abilities that weren't scaled down properly and hit a bottleneck in questing. Some argue it's actually good for the game to have some vanilla style difficulty added to some mobs, which I wouldn't disagree with, but I think it misses the point that it's just poor game design. to have a set of trivial mobs that are easily overpowered and then wander into one truly lethal mob for no apparent reason. Classic just doesn't work that way. Algorithmic scaling caused problems with Battle for Azeroth also, and many of the glitches caused by BFA scaling are still active, meaning that in Shadowlands, low-level questing is increasingly just a collection of cumulative errors, with the original vision of the designers of the older expansions completely lost. There is something rather sad about the borderline contemptuous attitude the current developers have for the older content, which may be obsolete technically, but often exhibited better storytelling and style than more recent offerings. Now, although I never made videos about it, the Warcraft lore is something I used to be really passionate about. Warcraft's lore is a mixed bag, but at its best it approaches high fantasy. Fantasy writing in whatever media is often truly dire. Much as I love the genre, it is very rare to find any kind of intelligent storytelling. And I have to say I'm extremely disappointed in the lore in Shadowlands. Not so much because of the actual story itself, but more because of the way that it retroactively destroys the lore of past expansions and the earlier incarnations of Warcraft. Many players were drawn to WoW by the story of Arthas, whose descent into madness and evil is disturbingly plausible despite the fantastic context, with an essentially good man brutalised by the Purge of Launderon, then consumed with vengeance, isolated from his people, and ultimately consumed by evil. That story as it stands in Shadowlands no longer exists, as Arthur seems to have been robbed of his free will through the artifices of the Jailer, a largely one-dimensional and uninteresting character. Similarly, many were attracted to WoW through the character of Sylvanas, a complex and interesting character up until Battle for Azeroth, who became what has often been described as a moustache-twirling villain, a crude but accurate description of her current character arc, committing acts of depravity without any real explanation and acquiring ridiculous power, again without any real explanation, other than that she is carrying out the will of and acting as an agent of the Jailer. The recent revelation that Sylvanas' death and transformation ultimately trace back to the actions of the Jailer is an interesting plot twist, but it does make her out to be sufficiently less intelligent and more trusting than we'd been led to believe. Now, with regard to the actual gameplay of Shadowlands, it's pretty much what you'd expect. Warcraft has always been an extremely grindy and repetitive game, and playability tends to fall off a cliff after the initial new content is completed, only rising again for the relatively small minority who raid competitively or do rated PvP. And to be honest, this isn't an easily solved problem. To make, say, world quests significantly more interesting and complex, you'd have to overhaul the game's creaking code completely. One of the most maddening things about the current incarnation of Warcraft is the way that when players start doing something interesting, Blizzard should either encourage or at least get out of the way and let people do that thing. Gold deflation in Battle for Azeroth, for example, caused many players to start doing legacy raids for raw gold. One of my most successful videos with over 400,000 views was simply a guide for players to run through old raids efficiently. People clearly liked and enjoyed doing this. However, nerfs in Shadowlands mostly destroyed raw gold farming. Why? Who benefits from that? There does seem to be this pattern where any kind of emergent gameplay is viewed as a threat by Blizzard, when that gameplay is often the only reason players are staying subbed. With regard to Torgast, there are a lot of flaws with the concept as it's currently implemented, but as with the horrific visions in Battle for Azeroth, I find it to be an interesting experiment that shows a lot of promise for the future. PvP is the thing I most enjoy doing in WoW, and the consensus on this seems to be that the return of PvP vendors has made all the difference. While this is very heartening in a lot of ways, it is a bit depressing that it took Blizzard 2 years to come up with this blindingly obvious solution when there was so much latent enthusiasm for PvP. issues still exist. There is still a problem with PvE gear being too powerful in PvP, which hopefully will be addressed in upcoming patches. One of the things I've really enjoyed doing in Arena is playing 1 versus 2. Mostly 2 players can stun lock any individual opponent, but it's really exciting to pull off a win against the odds when you actually manage it, and it really improves you as a player. Anyway, that's just my take on a few things. I really would like to know what you think. Please leave a comment below and vote in the poll if you haven't already. And if you have any interest in the game glitches I mentioned earlier, you will definitely want to subscribe to this channel. For the hardcore who really want to see how far you can stretch creative uses of game mechanics, and if you can afford it, you may wish to consider joining my Patreon, where I post secret glitches too hot for YouTube. Thanks for watching. This has been Archwelder.